Welcome to Democracy Talk, the interview series for the International Association of Constitutional Law's forthcoming Virtual Global Roundtable, Democracy 2020, Assessing Constitutional Decay, Breakdown and Renewal Worldwide. It's taking place on the 18th to the 26th of November, 9 webinars across 5 days. Now, I was delighted to sit down on the 2nd of November with two speakers from webinar 1, which is taking place on the 18th of November, Shireen Morris and Andrew Ball, who will be speaking on technology, inequality and democratic decline. Is Australia at risk? Shireen is a senior lecturer at Macquarie Law School in Sydney, and Andrew is a senior consultant with Accenture in Melbourne. Shireen and Andrew, you're very welcome.
Thanks for having us, Tom.
So I'm really delighted that you were able to join us for this short 10-minute interview, particularly because this is an unusual collaboration. It's a constitutional lawyer and a practitioner working together on this issue. Can you tell me a little bit more about how this came about?
Yeah, so Andrew and I have known each other for years and years, since high school really. And this is one of the things I've enjoyed most about this collaboration, is that it's taking me into a new area of constitutional law, which is democratic decline. But Andrew's not a constitutional lawyer or academic at all. So we're bringing together Andrew's IT. He's a senior manager at Accenture, but he brings the data analytics skills and I bring my constitutional law scholarship. And it's been a real enjoyable collaboration so far.
I think we're going to see more of this in the future, aren't we? Where we really need to pool our skills in this area. So I'm interested, in your paper and what you're going to be talking about in the webinar, you argue that technological change is the key factor facilitating democratic decline in developing democracies like the US, like Australia. So what types of technological change are we talking about here?
So I think there's two broad categories of technological change. The first relates to job displacement and its associated impacts on economic inequality. And the second one is really around online platforms and how they change the nature of political debate. So within that first category of job displacement, there's really three causes of job displacement. The first being around automation. Now, it's not all a bad story. There's actually some jobs that are enhanced by automation. Their productivity is enhanced. Their demand for those particular skill sets are enhanced, particularly around the what's called abstract jobs. So these are jobs in the professional jobs. There might be a software engineer, might be a lawyer. Those sorts of jobs, we're actually finding a lot of benefit when it comes to technology. However, we are finding some jobs, your routine jobs, like your manufacturing and office administration jobs, are definitely being displaced by technology. So that's the first area. The second area, why jobs tend to get displaced, is really around globalization. And again, we see technology as having a major role in this, in that it's enabled globalization via stuff such as improved telecommunications, shipping containerization, reduced air travel costs, for example. And the third one is market liberalisation. So we don't necessarily see there's a direct link with market liberalisation. However, we do see that governments have pursued market liberalisation as a means of raising living standards in an increasingly globalised world. And that's been enabled by technology. So it's really the combination of all those three that have led to increased economic inequality and a hollowing out of the economic middle, which can destabilise political systems. The other factor that we talked about is the online platforms and how they change political debates. So we know online platforms reduce attention spans, they decrease memory, they can dull empathy, and they can also inhibit our abilities to reason and deliberate. As technology introduces new media channels, we're seeing increased competitive pressure on outlets really to differentiate themselves from each other. And they typically do that through two means. One is more sensationalist content, and the other one is targeting niche audiences with that niche content. So when combined with the ability of users to mute those dissenting voices on these online platforms, that can lead to creation of echo chambers. And online platforms also enable extremist politicians to reach those voters directly. So bypassing some of those traditional gatekeepers that existed in the broadcast and print media. Lastly, I think it's also the absence of these gatekeepers that can lead to the creation and rapid proliferation of fake news. So in summary, what you're seeing is, all of these factors combined allow for political discontent to be amplified. And so the role of technology is that not only is it displacing jobs, but it's really amplifying the discontent associated with this job displacement.
Yeah. A key question for us that we find fascinating is, you've got technology driving this job polarization in the economic workforce sphere, a hollowing out of the middle, decline in the middle class. And at the same time, this supercharged political polarization through social media. And I think there's more, a question to be answered is the one feeding into the other? Is job polarization creating political polarization? Yeah.
Because we have this relationship between them, don't we? And just for a global audience, can you provide me with a few examples of, how this is actually hitting the Australian society and the political system?
So some good examples in the social media side of things. I think we've seen recently in the middle of the pandemic, the Dan lied, people died hashtag, for example. Research found that was driven by these fake hyper-partisan accounts and then being amplified in turn by other fake accounts. We remember in the bushfires earlier in, was it this year? It was, wasn't it? The bots amplifying the argument around arson. And the one that I find funny is that, we're used to hearing about bots amplifying certain messages, but I think 2 Australian MPs have been caught out. The infamous Angus Taylor forgot to switch username profiles before commenting under his own post. Well done, great job, Angus. So that kind of thing is, as users, we're increasingly unable to sort fact from fiction in online debate. And the death tax scare campaign was a classic one during the 2019 federal election, which we saw revamped again in the recent Queensland election.
Yeah, so this was sort of a complete rebranding of what was a rather straightforward policy under a much scarier new title by actors within the political system.
That's right. And recent polling shows that Australians are, increasingly going to the web for their news, but are increasingly concerned about fake news. Children are increasingly, research shows, unable to discern what's real news and what's fake. So I think it's a real question for if most of our political debate is happening online, what are we going to do about the truth and rational nature of, protecting truthful political discourse?
Exactly. I mean, the online is no longer just an add-on. It is one of the central areas where this is all happening, right?
The first year in Australia, according to the Australian election study, that online was the main source where people got their political news and information. So it's really important to get that area right, given, this is going to become an increase. It already is an important area, and it will continue to be an important area.
Thanks so much, Andrew and Shireen. And, thinking about this from the positive point of view, as we are trying to do in the roundtable, thinking about democratic resilience and renewal, are there any ways to start addressing these issues that are arising?
Yeah, so I think there's not one silver bullet solution. I think it's going to need a holistic suite of reforms. Tackling the drivers, so tackling rising economic inequality as a key driver. So some of the things we suggest are the increased need to retrain workers in the face of technologically induced job displacement. So things like lifelong learning accounts supported by government that Singapore pursues there. But we have to admit that not everybody will be able to transition from routine jobs into higher paying, higher skilled abstract jobs. Some people will be facing insecure work and unemployment. So I'm very interested in this idea of a federally funded job guarantee. So rather than just a welfare safety net, government should step up as an employer of last resort and guarantee jobs for those who are left behind. And I think one of the key reasons we're seeing these trends since the 1980s is that after the liberalising reforms in the 80s, government's approach to economic management really changed. So before that, you saw political leaders on the left and right pursuing full employment as a headline policy, even if that required budget deficits. So I think greater government intervention in ensuring people are not left behind. But research recently, I think Paul Kildea did some research around this. Australians are really interested in mechanisms for direct democracy and deliberative democracy at the moment, particularly disaffected citizens. So I think we need to, as constitutional lawyers, be looking a lot harder at what mechanisms we can include. So some research shows that deliberation is the way to help people discern fake news from real news and to help bridge those polarizing tribalistic divides. So, you know, I worked a lot in Indigenous recognition and the Uluru Statement. How can we replicate the dialogues that led to the Uluru Statement from the Heart more broadly in our democracy? Do we need to look at things like citizen-initiated referendums like they have in New Zealand, for example? And then, of course, we need to look at online debate as well. So truth in political advertising laws. How do we make platforms more accountable when they're facilitating fake political ads, for example?
Thanks, Shireen. So there are many potential reforms, and it's great to know that sort of the tech side and the constitutional law side are coming together to try and come up with those solutions. So both to you, Shireen, and to Andrew, thank you so much for joining me today. And I'm really looking forward to the discussion in Webinar 1 on the 18th of November.
Thanks so much for having us, Tom.
Thank you.